It was a warm evening in the small town of Silver Creek, tucked away in the heart of the rugged American West. The town, though simple, was lively with the sounds of horses trotting on dusty streets and the occasional chatter of cowboys and traders. In the midst of this, Jack Donovan, a young cowboy, sat at the bar of the local saloon. His rugged clothes were worn from the long hours spent on horseback, guiding cattle through the open plains. His broad shoulders and strong hands told the story of a man who had spent most of his life in the wilds, where each day was a battle against the harsh elements of nature. Jack wasn't one to spend much time in towns. He preferred the open spaces, the wide skies, and the quiet that came with life on a ranch. But tonight he had ridden in for supplies, and the long day had left him thirsty and ready for a break. The saloon was crowded with people, each lost in their own conversations. But Jack didn't mind the noise. He just wanted a drink. As he took a sip from his glass, his eyes scanned the room. The saloon was dimly lit, with smoke swirling in the air from the tobacco pipes of old cowhands. The air was filled with the smell of whiskey, leather, and dust. But then something caught Jack's eye, a woman walking through the saloon door. She was not like any other woman Jack had ever seen. Her presence seemed to fill the room with a quiet power. She was dressed in the traditional attire of an Apache woman, beads and feathers that adorned her long dark hair. Her face was strong and beautiful, and though she moved gracefully, there was a certain strength in the way she carried herself. She walked with purpose, as if she belonged to the land, as if she were part of something much greater than the people around her. The room grew quieter, and Jack's gaze followed her as she made her way to the bar. She didn't seem to notice the stares of the other men, but Jack couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something about her that drew him in, something that seemed both mysterious and familiar. The woman took a seat at the bar, and Jack found himself standing, as if pulled by an invisible force. He wasn't sure why, but he felt the need to speak to her. After all, it wasn't every day that an Apache woman came to town. Most of the local cowboys kept their distance from the Native American tribes, and the tribes themselves weren't keen on mixing with settlers and ranchers. But there was something different about this woman, something that made Jack forget about the unspoken rules of the town. Jack walked over to the bar and cleared his throat before speaking. "You're not from around here, are you?" His voice was rough, shaped by years of spending time in the wilderness, but it was kind, not threatening. The woman turned to look at him. Her eyes were dark, like the night sky, and they held a calmness that Jack couldn't quite understand. "No," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'm from the Apache tribe. My name is Tala." Jack nodded, unsure of what to say next. It wasn't every day that a cowboy got to talk to someone from the Apache people, and he had heard enough stories to know that such encounters were rarely friendly. Yet there was something about Tala that didn't fit the stories. She didn't look like someone who was angry or distrustful of him. She didn't even seem wary as he might have expected. Instead, Tala gave him a small smile, and for a moment, Jack forgot about the roughness of the world outside. It was as though she had the ability to calm the storm inside him, something he hadn't known he needed. "Why are you here in Silver Creek?" Jack asked, still a bit uncertain. He was curious but cautious. After all, a woman from the Apache tribe would likely have her reasons for coming to a town like Silver Creek, a place filled with settlers and cowboys who often didn't see eye to eye with the native tribes. Tala looked down at her drink for a moment, as if weighing her words. "I've come for help," she said quietly. "My people are struggling. There is no food, no water. The land is becoming harder to live on. I need to speak with the leaders of the town." Jack's curiosity deepened, and he could see the worry in her eyes. The Apache were known to be fierce, independent, and proud, but Tala's words seemed to carry a weight that made Jack want to listen. There was something more to her story, something Jack felt he needed to understand. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Jack said, "but I'll be honest. Folks around here don't always see eye to eye with your people." Tala nodded, a knowing look crossing her face. "I know," she said softly, "but my people don't want trouble. We just want to survive." The conversation lingered in the air, and Jack found himself thinking about the struggles of the Apache people. He had never truly thought about the hardships they faced. The West was changing quickly, and those who lived by the old ways were finding it harder to survive. The settlers, the ranchers, and the railroaders all had their own dreams of building a future in the West. but the Apache had their own way of life that was slowly being pushed aside. As the night went on, Jack and Tala continued talking. The more they spoke, the more Jack realized that Tala was not like the stories he had heard. She was smart, strong, and deeply connected to the land. She spoke of her people with love and pride, and Jack couldn't help but feel a deep respect for her. The hours passed, and soon the saloon began to empty. The other patrons had either left or gone off to their own corners, leaving Jack and Tala alone at the bar. The room was quiet now, save for the occasional clink of glasses and the soft rustling of the wind outside. Tala looked at Jack, and there was a serious expression on her face. "I didn't come here just to ask for help," she said quietly. "There's something else I need to tell you." Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. "What is it?" Tala took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with a sense of calm determination. "I'm pregnant with your child." Jack's heart skipped a beat. For a moment he couldn't comprehend what she had just said. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the words. He had barely known Tala for a few hours, and yet somehow the truth of her words hung in the air between them. "You're what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tala nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I'm pregnant, and the child is yours." The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of her words settling in like a storm cloud. Jack stood there, speechless, unable to fully grasp what had just been revealed. His mind was racing, but in the midst of the confusion, one thing became clear. His life was about to change forever. Jack stood there in silence, his heart racing. The words Tala had spoken echoed in his mind like a distant thunderclap. "I'm pregnant with your child." It was as if the world around him had suddenly stopped moving, leaving him frozen in place. He tried to process what she had said, but the weight of it all felt too much to bear. Tala sat there, waiting for him to say something. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if this was a simple truth she had been holding on to, something she knew would eventually be shared. Jack, however, was anything but calm. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and he found himself struggling to form any coherent words. "Are you sure?" Jack finally managed to ask. His voice came out softer than he intended, but the question was sincere. He had barely known Tala for a few hours, and their brief encounter had been filled with conversation, but never anything that would suggest something like this. He had never considered the possibility of fathering a child with someone he had just met. Tala nodded slowly, her dark eyes locking with his. "Yes, I'm sure. We spent a night together a few weeks ago," she said softly. "And now I'm carrying your child." Jack's mind raced even faster. He remembered that night, the one where they had shared a few drinks and talked about everything and nothing. It had felt like a connection, something deeper than just a passing moment. But he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to walk into the saloon tonight and drop such a bombshell on him. "I didn't think—" Jack started, but he couldn't finish the thought. He didn't know what to think. He wasn't ready to be a father. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to be a father. His life had always been about working the cattle, riding the open range, and being free from the responsibilities that came with family life. He had always believed he wasn't the type of man to settle down. Tala didn't seem to expect any immediate response from him. She had spoken her truth, and now she was waiting for him to process it. Her calmness only made Jack feel more unsettled. How could she be so composed? How could she say something like that with such certainty? "I understand if you're confused," Tala said, her voice gentle. "I didn't come here to trap you, Jack. I just wanted you to know the truth. You have a right to know about the child." Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to clear his thoughts. He didn't know what to do. The idea of fatherhood terrified him. What did it mean for his life? What did it mean for his future? He had never pictured himself with a family, much less a child he would have to care for and raise. He wasn't sure he was capable of that kind of responsibility. He looked at Tala again, seeing her for the first time through a different lens. She wasn't just the beautiful Apache woman who had captured his attention that night. She was a woman with a life, a past, and now a future that was tied to his own in ways he couldn't yet understand. "I didn't plan for this," Jack said, his voice shaky. "I didn't plan on any of this." Tala nodded slowly, her expression softening. "I didn't plan on it either. But here we are." Jack took a deep breath and looked around the nearly empty saloon. The weight of the moment was starting to sink in. He had always lived a solitary life, moving from one place to the next, never settling down. But now something was different. He was going to be a father. He didn't know if he was ready, but it was happening, whether he was prepared or not. "I don't know what to do," Jack admitted. The honesty in his voice was raw, something he rarely allowed himself to show. I'm not sure I can do this. I've never had anyone depend on me before." Tala's eyes softened as she reached out and placed a hand gently on his. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Jack. I just want you to be a part of the child's life. Whether you want to be with me or not, the child will need you. I need you to know that." Jack sat down beside her, his mind still spinning. He had never imagined his life taking this turn. He had always been focused on himself, on surviving in a world that didn't always offer second chances. The idea of a child, his child, was foreign to him. What would that mean for him? Would he be able to change his life to become the kind of father a child deserved? Tala, sensing his confusion, gave him space. She wasn't going to pressure him, but she also wasn't going to back down. She had made it clear that she wasn't asking for anything from him other than his presence. And yet Jack felt a responsibility, a weight on his shoulders that he couldn't ignore. "I don't know if I'm cut out to be a father," Jack said after a long pause. "I've spent my whole life on the move, never sticking around long enough to care about anything. How can I just suddenly become someone's father?" Tala turned to face him fully, her eyes filled with understanding. "Being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up when it matters. It's about loving your child, even if you don't know what you're doing. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Jack, but I believe you'll find a way." Jack didn't have an answer to that. He wasn't sure if he could be the kind of man Tala believed he could be, the kind of man who would be there for his child. But something inside him stirred. He couldn't shake the thought of that child growing up without him. The idea of being a father scared him, yes, but the idea of not trying at all was even more terrifying. "Give me time," Jack finally said, his voice low but steady. "I need time to think this through," Tala nodded. "I'll give you time, but don't take too long. The child will be here before you know it." Jack wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just been changed in a way he never expected. The open plains, the cattle, the freedom, none of it seemed as important as it had before. For the first time in his life, Jack found himself thinking about someone other than himself. And whether he was ready or not, he was going to have to step up to the responsibility that was now before him. As Tala stood to leave, she gave Jack one last look, her gaze full of quiet strength. "I'll be waiting, Jack," she said, "for you to make up your mind." Jack watched her walk out of the saloon, the weight of her words still hanging in the air. He didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. The days after Tala's revelation felt heavy on Jack's heart. He tried to focus on his usual work, riding out to tend to cattle, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation in the saloon. Tala's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the responsibility he never saw coming. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of a child, his child, growing up in a world Jack had barely begun to understand. Jack had never planned for any of this. His life had always been about freedom, the open sky, the endless plains, the cattle drives, and the quiet solitude of the wilderness. He wasn't a man who liked to settle down, nor had he ever imagined having a family. The idea of fatherhood, especially with someone like Tala, an Apache woman from a completely different world, seemed impossible. He had never been around children, let alone the father of one. Yet the reality of it gnawed at him every waking moment. One morning, after a restless night of little sleep, Jack decided he could no longer ignore the situation. He knew he had to make a decision, and if he were going to be involved in his child's life, he had to do more than just think about it. He needed to find Tala. He needed to hear her side of the story again and figure out what his next move would be. The decision was made quickly. Jack packed up his things and saddled his horse. It wasn't the first time he had ridden out into the wild, but this journey felt different. This time, he wasn't riding for cattle or work. He was riding for something far more important, a future he had never imagined. The sun was just beginning to rise as Jack made his way out of Silver Creek, the quiet morning air cool against his skin. The sound of his horse's hooves on the dirt road was the only noise that accompanied him, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the thoughts running through his head. He had no clear idea of where he was going, just that he had to find Tala. She had told him she would return to her people, but where exactly was that? The Apache lived in several different areas, and Jack knew only a little about their territories. He had heard stories from other cowboys about Apache lands, but those stories were filled with cautionary tales of danger, of hostility, of clashes between settlers and native tribes. But Jack didn't let fear control him. He knew that whatever lay ahead, he had to face it. He owed it to the child, and perhaps more importantly, he owed it to Tala. The journey was long and exhausting. Jack rode through the open plains, over rocky hills, and through dense forests. He had no map, no guide, and he didn't exactly know where to find Tala or her people. All he knew was that he had to keep going. Every day he asked around at small settlements, hoping someone had seen an Apache woman traveling through. Most of the people he encountered gave him wary looks but offered little help. The relationship between settlers and Native Americans was fraught with tension, and no one was eager to point him in the direction of an Apache camp. Days turned into a week, and Jack's supplies began to run low. He had hoped to find Tala sooner, but he wasn't about to turn back now. His determination to do right by her and the child kept him moving forward. Every morning, he mounted his horse with a sense of purpose, and every evening he set up camp under the stars, the stillness of the desert reminding him of how far he had come and how much further he had to go. Finally, after what felt like an endless trek, Jack arrived at a small Apache village nestled in a valley between two mountains. The village was quiet, with smoke rising from small fires and women tending to cooking pots while children played nearby. The air smelled of smoke and sagebrush, and there was a stillness in the air that felt both peaceful and ancient. Jack approached the village cautiously, knowing that his arrival would not go unnoticed. As he rode closer, a few of the villagers glanced up, their eyes sharp and curious. Jack dismounted and walked his horse toward a central fire where a group of men were gathered. He could sense their wariness, their silent judgment of the outsider. But Jack didn't flinch. He had come too far to turn back now. "Excuse me," Jack said, his voice steady but respectful. "I'm looking for a woman named Tala. She's from your tribe." The men looked at each other before one of them, an older man with a long beard, stepped forward. His gaze was piercing, and Jack could tell that the man was sizing him up, evaluating whether Jack posed a threat or if he could be trusted. "Tala?" the man asked in a low voice, his accent thick. "Why are you looking for her?" Jack hesitated for a moment, then answered, "I need to speak with her. It's important. I'm the father of her child." At that, the men exchanged glances, and Jack could see the tension in their eyes. Some nodded slightly, while others looked at him with suspicion. After a long pause, the older man spoke again. "Follow me," he said, turning on his heel and walking toward a group of tents on the outskirts of the village. Jack followed silently, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he was expecting, but the further he walked into the village, the more he felt like an outsider. Everything about the Apache way of life was different from what he had known, different from what he had been taught to fear. The quiet strength of the people, the deep connection to the land, and the tight-knit community stood in stark contrast to the individualistic lifestyle of the settlers. Eventually, they arrived at a small fire where Tala sat, her face calm and serene. She was surrounded by a few women from the village, and as soon as she saw Jack, she stood up. There was a flicker of emotion in her eyes, relief maybe, or perhaps something deeper. Jack approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. The moment felt both intimate and tense, as if everything depended on the conversation that was about to unfold. "Tala," Jack said softly, his voice carrying a mix of uncertainty and resolve. "I've come to talk. I need to understand. I need to understand what this means for us and for the child." Tala didn't speak right away. She studied him with the same quiet intensity that had drawn him to her in Silver Creek. Then, slowly she spoke. "You've come all this way." "Jack," she said, her voice steady but filled with something deeper. Wisdom, maybe. "You didn't have to. But you're here, and that's what matters. I didn't expect you to come, not really. But I knew deep down you'd find your way here eventually. The child deserves to know both his parents." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. The child, his child. This was no longer just a distant possibility. It was real, and it was his responsibility. "I don't know what to do," Jack admitted, looking down at his hands. I've never been a father. I don't even know how to start. Tala placed a hand on his arm gently, offering him the same calm that she had shown him in the saloon. You don't have to have all the answers, Jack, she said softly. Just start with this, be present. That's all any child needs. Jack looked into her eyes and saw the strength of a woman who had faced hardship and loss, yet still carried hope. And in that moment something clicked. He may not have all the answers, but he had something more important, the chance to try. The days that followed Jack's arrival at the Apache village were filled with a mix of tension and hope. Jack had come to realize that his world and Tala's world were as different as night and day. He had spent most of his life on the open plains, surrounded by cattle, cowboys, and the constant push for survival, in a world that demanded strength and independence. Now he found himself in a place where the rhythm of life was slower, quieter, and deeply rooted in the land. The Apache people lived in harmony with nature, respecting the earth and their traditions, while Jack had always relied on the land only when it suited him. As Jack stayed in the village, he began to understand that being part of this world wasn't going to be easy. The Apache people were wary of him. After all, a white man was not a familiar presence in their community. Their past interactions with settlers and soldiers had been full of conflict and mistrust, and Jack knew that he would have to earn their trust if he ever hoped to build a life with Tala and the child they were about to bring into the world. Jack had never been one to back down from a challenge, but the challenge here wasn't just physical. It was emotional, cultural, and even spiritual. The Apache people had a strong sense of identity, and their traditions ran deep. Jack, by contrast, was a man raised in a world that valued individualism above all else. He had always been his own man, living by his own rules, and now he had to learn how to fit into a community that held family and tribe above personal freedom. The first few days in the village were awkward. Jack spent most of his time with Tala, trying to understand her people's way of life. Tala was patient with him, teaching him about the Apache customs, the stories of their ancestors and their connection to the land. But as much as Jack wanted to fit in, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an outsider. The other members of the tribe were kind enough, but their eyes often held a quiet judgment, as if they were watching him closely, waiting for him to make a mistake. One afternoon, Tala's father, an elder named Kachina, invited Jack to sit with him by the fire. Kachina was a man of few words, his face weathered and wise, his eyes full of years of experience. Jack knew that this meeting was important. Kachina was the leader of the tribe, and his approval or lack thereof would mean everything. Jack, Kachina began, his voice deep and steady, you are here because you have chosen to be a part of our world. But there is more to being Apache than simply living among us. To be Apache, you must understand our ways and respect our beliefs. You must learn to live as we live, to honor the earth as we do. Jack nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known this would be hard, but hearing it from Kachina made the challenge feel more real. I want to understand, Kachina, Jack said, his voice sincere. I want to learn. I want to be here for Tala and for the child. Kachina studied Jack for a long moment, his eyes sharp. Words are easy, he said, but actions speak louder than words. You must prove to us that you are willing to change. Will you learn to live with respect for this land? Will you stand with us when we need you? Jack felt the weight of the question. It was not just about him anymore. It was about Tala, the child, and their future together. He had no answers, no guarantees, but he knew he had to try. I will do what it takes, Jack said, his voice firm. I will learn. Kachina gave a small nod, a flicker of approval in his eyes. We will see. Over the next few weeks, Jack immersed himself in the life of the village. He learned to hunt with the men, to gather food from the earth, and to participate in the rituals that marked important moments in the Apache calendar. He spent long hours with Tala, talking about the child they were about to bring into the world, and what kind of parents they hoped to be. Jack's heart began to soften as he spent more time with Tala, and he found himself growing more attached to the idea of a family than he had ever thought possible. But despite his best efforts, there were moments when Jack felt the weight of the differences between the world he had known and the world he was now trying to join. The Apache people had a deep spiritual connection to the land, and their customs were rooted in centuries of tradition. Jack, on the other hand, had always seen the land as something to be conquered, something to be worked for personal gain. His upbringing had been shaped by the cowboy culture of the West, where men were expected to be strong and self-reliant. with little regard for the collective good. One evening, as Jack sat by the fire with the other men, an argument broke out. One of the younger men, a hot-headed Apache named Tso, had been watching Jack closely, and he finally spoke up. "You don't belong here," Tso said, his voice loud and challenging. "You come from a people who took our land, who killed our families, and now you want to pretend to be one of us?" Jack stood up, his anger rising. "I'm not pretending," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I've come here because I want to be part of this, because I want to be here for Tala and the child. I'm not like those other men. I'm not here to steal anything." Tso's eyes flashed with anger. "You can say all the right words, but your people have taken everything from us. Do you think we can forget that?" The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment it seemed like the argument might turn violent. Jack could feel the heat of Tso's anger, but he knew that fighting would get him nowhere. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm sorry for what happened," Jack said quietly, "but I can't change the past. All I can do is try to do better from here on out. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do expect a chance to prove myself." There was a long silence. Finally, Kachina, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, stood up and stepped forward. "So," Kachina said in a quiet but powerful voice. "Enough." So looked at Kachina. Then down at the ground, his anger dissipating, Kachina turned to Jack. "You will have your chance to prove yourself, Jack," Kachina said. "But you must show the tribe that you are more than just a man from the outside. You must live with us not as a stranger, but as a member of the family." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of relief mixed with the understanding that this was just the beginning. He had taken the first step, but the journey was far from over. That night, as Jack lay under the stars beside Tala, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. The world he had come from was fading into the distance, and in its place was something new, something uncertain but full of promise. He didn't know if he could ever fully belong to the Apache world, but he knew that for Tala and the child he would try. He would give everything he had to make this work, no matter how hard it became. As the seasons passed in the Apache village, Jack found himself adjusting to the rhythm of life that had once seemed so foreign to him. He had arrived with nothing but a sense of uncertainty, unsure of what he was supposed to do or how he could belong. But now, as the days turned into months, Jack had found a new purpose. The world he had known, the life he had lived as a cowboy, felt like a distant memory. In its place was something deeper, something that held more meaning than the endless stretches of open plains he had once loved so much. The child, his child, was growing inside Tala, and every day Jack felt a stronger connection to both of them. It wasn't just about being a father anymore. It was about being part of something much larger than himself. It was about joining a community that had its own way of life, its own traditions, its own understanding of the world. Slowly, he began to fit into the Apache way. Not perfectly, but enough to see that the differences between him and them were not insurmountable. One evening, as Jack sat by the fire watching Tala and the other women prepare food for the evening meal, he felt a quiet sense of pride. He had worked hard to earn his place in the village. He had learned to hunt with the men, to gather the herbs and roots the women used for medicine, and to listen when the elders spoke of the land and their ancestors. He had begun to understand the importance of living in harmony with the earth, rather than trying to bend it to his will. But there were still moments when Jack felt like an outsider. Some of the older men in the village had warmed to him, but there were others who still looked at him with suspicion. So, the young man who had challenged him when he first arrived had softened over time, but his watchful eyes remained on Jack whenever he was near. Jack didn't blame him. He knew it would take time to prove himself, and he was willing to wait. He had never been the type of man to rush things. Then, one morning, as Jack was walking along the edge of the village, he saw a familiar figure approaching on horseback. It was Tala, her dark hair flowing behind her, and beside her a small bundle in her arms. Jack's heart skipped a beat when he saw her. She was pregnant now, her belly round with the child they had both been waiting for. As she drew closer, Jack could see the smile on her face, a smile that spoke of happiness and peace. When she reached him, she stopped her horse and dismounted with grace. "I've been waiting for you," Tala said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "The elders have called a meeting today. They want to speak with you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "What about?" Tala smiled, her eyes sparkling with the kind of knowledge only a woman who had lived through so much could have. About you becoming a part of this tribe. About you being a father. Jack didn't know what to say. He had always been a man of few words, but the enormity of what Tala was saying settled over him like a heavy blanket. He had been accepted into the village in his own way, but this was different. The elders were acknowledging him not just as a man, but as a father, a part of their family. It was a big step, one that neither he nor Tala had expected when they first met. "Are you ready for this?" Tala asked, her tone gentle but filled with understanding. Jack nodded, though his heart was pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that he would stand before the elders of the Apache tribe, asking to be accepted as part of their community. But he knew it was time. He couldn't keep hiding behind uncertainty any longer. He had made his choice, and it was time to show the tribe and himself that he was committed. As they walked toward the center of the village, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far he had come. When he had first arrived in the village, he had been a stranger, an outsider. Now he was walking beside the woman he loved, carrying their child. He had learned the ways of the Apache, and though he knew he still had much to learn, he felt like he had earned his place. The elders were gathered around the central fire, their faces calm and serious as they looked up at Jack. Kachina, the wise elder who had first spoken to him about what it meant to be part of the Apache world, was there, his sharp eyes watching Jack closely. Tala stood beside him, her hand gently resting on her growing belly. Jack took a deep breath, standing tall before the elders. He didn't speak right away. He let the weight of the moment sink in. After a long silence, Kachina spoke. "Jack Donovan," Kachina began, his voice steady, "you have come to us with nothing but your heart and your will. We have watched you, and we have seen how you have worked, how you have learned, and how you have respected our ways. You have shown us that you are not just a man from another world, but a man who has chosen to walk this path with us." The words filled Jack with a quiet pride. He had never been one for praise, but hearing the approval in Kachina's voice made him feel like he had truly earned something. He looked over at Tala, and she smiled softly at him, her eyes filled with love and hope. Kachina continued, "You are not just a father to this child. You are part of this tribe, and you have our blessing." The words were simple, but they were everything. Jack felt his chest tighten as the enormity of what had just happened washed over him. He wasn't just a man with a responsibility anymore. He was a part of something much larger than himself, something that had stood the test of time and tradition. Tala stepped forward then, her hand still resting on her belly, and placed it on Jack's chest. "This child will know both of us," she said softly, "and we will raise him together in both of our worlds." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. He had found his place in the world, and he had found a family. The elders rose one by one to offer their blessings. They spoke of strength, of tradition, of the deep connection to the land that all Apache shared. Jack listened, his heart swelling with pride as he realized how far he had come. He was no longer just the cowboy who had wandered into a strange village. He was part of this community now. He was a father, a partner, and a man who had chosen to live with purpose. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the village gathered around the fire, singing songs and telling stories. Jack sat beside Tala, his hand resting on her belly, listening to the stories of the Apache ancestors. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had found something worth living for. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. And as he looked around at the faces of the people who had accepted him, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.